I want to ask, what is a visionary city? But first of all, I'll explain to you that I'm an author and a curator. That means that I spend a long time traveling the world and researching cities and regions. I don't do this alone. I have a lot of collaborators. One of my most loyal researchers is my father, Dargan, who is an architect and a landscape designer. Now, he is a real campaigner for Reclaim the Streets because, he's got angina, so he can't walk very fast. So he's really in favor of pedestrianisation. And I'd say that we don't have so many cycle paths in London, so he has a really big job on his hands campaigning for increased pedestrianisation and cycle paths in the city that I live in. So, what is a visionary city? What are the mentalities, the actions, the mindsets? Actually, mindset means habitual thoughts. So maybe what are the fresh ideas that we need today? And what are some of the things of value that all cities, wherever they are, in the developed or the developing world, could really appreciate and do with? What are the things that across all generations we could really take advantage of? We know that a visionary city is one that really is preparing at a profound level for the future. Because the city is one of the most enduring artifacts that mankind creates, for better or for worse. Today, I don't think a city that's visionary can't fall off of production line, and it's certainly the teams behind visionary cities. They cannot have the audacity to ask for a clean slate, the tabula rasa that the modernists used to pray for. A city is one that is visionary, is one that's learning to adapt, to adjust, and accommodate. That's actually the Swami Sivananda yoga. That's their kind of their buzz phrase for how your mental idea with yoga. But it equally well applies to city planning. A visionary city has to protect its assets. It has to know what its leaks are. It has to know how and where to plug the holes in the bucket. So it's also a body with a metabolism like any body. And it's never finished. It's a process. And it's that evolutionary process that calls for really in-depth understanding and cultivation. Just like a garden, in fact. And it needs a really deep capacity to express all the relationships between all of those who dwell in it. I think if I could make a short menu for you right now, just on the back of the envelope, so to speak, it's one that creates mixed use, mixed tenure neighborhoods that are livable. It's one that's prepared to spend money on to create and maintain green spaces and parks. It's one that reduces and eliminates air pollution, and at least tries to limit noise. If not, cut it out. It can't do that. Creates new jobs, reduces unemployment through lifelong training. It makes itself resilient in the faces of innumerable stresses and shocks, and it's one that's capable of forging real communities of innovation, whatever type of innovation we might think of. And this is a co-creation process, and it involves asking, what is the city for? And whose city is this? And how can we mobilize local knowledge and action? And when Freda Escobedo, the Mexican architect, launched this beautiful installation in the garden at the Victoria and Albert Museum the other week, which I recommend you to see, you cannot see yourself so well except by a reflection, it's called. And she told me that the layers of the reflective surfaces that you can either sit or stand and gather together on, have a picnic on, they were inspired by Tenochtitlan, the ancient Aztec city that was built on a lake, and the remains of which you can see still in Mexico City today. She said that surfaces, they're intended to echo the multicultural dimensions that coexist in Mexico. So, thinking about it, we get visions We get visions, we get glimpses in our reverie of our visionary urban future all the time. And it's about both how we're perceived and how we perceive. But you probably all know that master plans in the past were very often, invariably, top-down, technically oriented, because to overcome the city's very major hygiene issues, industry and housing were very strictly zoned and segregated. The street was killed off, the green spaces were abstracted from their natural topography and landscape. So, for example, Le Corbusier's Plan Voisin from 1925, which influenced very much one of the new towns in Hong Kong. So the late Peter Hall, the British author of over 40 books on urban planning, design, history, and theory. Now, I gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award a while back at the Leaf Awards. And he pointed out in his acceptance speech that the really big irony that when the visions are conceived, there's a time lapse. When they're finally implemented in another time, another space, different socio-political environment, the results are bizarre, but they're sometimes catastrophic, moreover. And I was thinking, the musician John Cage, he once said, "I can't understand why people are afraid of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones." So did Cage mean that's because those old ones have a way of creeping back into our life? And so the master plan of old strategy of rigid top-down social imposition is still there. That's the bad news. It's very, very prevalent in many cultures. And I've interviewed a lot of architects and planners who are working equally in the formal and the informal city. And they're challenging these narrow, socially normative vision, in inverted commas, of developers, very short-term. Let's see what commercial profit we can make. So, for example, in Johannesburg, the architect and planner Michael Hart, he argues that it's nonsensical to plan for new suburbs by upgrading informal townships in order to dictate car-oriented planning, car-oriented solutions that are favored by developers and the planning authorities, when the reality is that so few citizens actually have cars there, the local people. So instead, his design proposal for Lion Park, which is a part of the Cosmos City township scheme in Johannesburg, it's influenced by the Dutch Wunef system concept, concept, moreover, of roadways shared with public spaces. So Wunef literally means living streets. With small parks flanked by community buildings. So you have social space for children to play, gathering areas for the local people by day or by night. So Michael acknowledges the reality that informal settlement dwellers, they cannot compete with the formal economy. They have their own, a high percentage of them are self-employed, right? And a lot of them are involved in recycling activities. So both at Lion Park and at Slovo, he includes spaces and facilities for small businesses to be nurtured, including, say, waste to energy, and market areas for people to trade and to share their produce. And they're also very near transport hubs, so you can, eliminate, as a small business owner, you can more or less eliminate a lot of your transport costs. He's devised strategies to boost environmental capital. This is relational, responsive urbanism. And the developers who favor an isolating, sprawling tapestry of Mac mansions-style dwellings have no such connection with reality. I saw Hugh Masekela, the celebrated trumpeter on the BBC International today, and he was saying, in South Africa, we still have apartheid, and we have town planning apartheid, moreover. These developers are playing a big role in such a thing. So what if a city has been hit by earthquake and tsunami, and often they go together very tragically, like Constituzione, Chile's second city, where in 2010, 80% of people were left homeless and over 70% of the buildings were destroyed. So with the city on its knees, Elemental, Tironi and Arabs, the architects, planners and engineers, they were given just 100 days to produce their sustainable reconstruction plan. So as Alejandro Aravena, the founder of Elemental, said, we had to have, on one hand, design ideas with public consensus, but at the same time design the mechanisms for the plan's implementation. We simply didn't have the luxury to plan first, then consult the public, and then figure out how to implement it. We had to do everything at the same time. And so there had to be a big synergy in their thinking. So they came up with formulas with new wide avenues for evacuation in the event of another tragedy, new coastal forests to mitigate rather than block flood waves, so creating a natural response to a natural threat instead of big concrete barriers. So reorientation of the city towards the waterfront to support local fishermen and bring back tourism, new lightweight wooden buildings, housing projects where, in fact, if you wanted to, you could buy half a house with a space next to it to actually build it at your leisure when you had the money to pay for it. An incredible formula of Elemental's. So the pivotal role that citizens played in the plan made it unique. And Elemental built a citizens' open house in the center of the city for the continually evolving plans. So they didn't just stare at the walls, they were holding weekly citizen forums with the authorities and the technical experts where they could report on the progress, but they could also be confronted with the issues. And a lot of, inevitably a lot of old historical wounds came up. People were expressing grievances. But in the end, an information also delivered by SMS and by a loudhailer on the top of a car. So as part of this transparent process, which was multi-scale and multi-channel, the culmination was that it was sealed by an eventual voting process, which is very rare in Chile and in many other countries, with 94% of locals voting in favor of the plan. So now, 5 years later, 40% of the plan is fully realized. And something of the city's soul has been rescued as a process. So it feels visionary to identify and build on existing social, cultural, and physical assets, to build on what we already have. You notice I never use the word utopian, not once. So value what is there, nurture the possible, and define what is missing. So last example, Dalston in East London, may have lots of cafes, but it's still amongst the 20% of the most deprived areas of the city, with 12% less green space than in the rest of the wider borough of Hackney. And now the good news, it has a new overground railway station near the Olympic site, which is fantastic. It's an area already rich in cultural diversity and with a long history of social activism. The main meeting point is the 50-year-old Ridley Street Market. And in the 90s, there was the main Gillette Square. You just wouldn't go there because the murder rate was just horrendous. You have your belongings stolen. And in the 90s, it was regenerated into a vibrant town square. So they put in affordable market kiosks for businesses, created a library in an old factory, the Vortex Jazz Club, and making space in Dalston was a plan that a friend of mine, Liza Fior, who leads Muff Architecture and Art, and her first principle was deep engagement with the local people and the stakeholders. So they made 10 different costed proposals after a process of mapping all the local assets, not by being like private investigators, but actually talking with everybody. So they found out that there were 700 existing arts venues, large and small, and they amassed them in a chart and analyzed them. Different types of green open spaces, so little plots of urban agriculture, small city farms, and so on. And from that, they created one new continuous park for the district. A new play space and amenities on Gillette Square, and heritage walks and signage. And you know, funnily enough, it's actually very uncannily similar to what Sarkozy did with an ideas competition when he was president for Le Grand Paris. He came up with a concept, and the two of the competing groups did the same thing as Liza. They mapped all the areas of disused land, whatever the nature, in the urban region and connected them. A massive amount of hectares not being used and could be used for fabulous, all kinds of things. So, you know, now, of course, we have open source digital platforms, so we can do all kinds of things. And Brickstarter, for example, which a guy called Dan Hill in Helsinki invented. So mapping disused units on high streets and then connecting them with people, potential new users. So here we go, the key concepts. The city is an unfinished work. Okay, that's good. So we still have things we can do. It's not basta. It's not everything already done. On the contrary. So, and its evolution happens because of visionary citizens, not around them and in spite of them, but with them. So participatory placemaking is a subject that is close to my heart. So value what is there, nurture the possible, define what is missing. And in the UK, Second World War slogan for rationing, make, do, and mend. We are in an era of austerity, and a lot of people are very angry about the government policies. Make, do, and mend, and the DIY culture is showing new faces and new possibilities all the time. So why not now? So Michael Hart's plan is resilient because it builds on the reality of what residents need. And Constitucione's plan is resilient because citizens were involved from the very beginning. And MUF's plan, citizen consultation and involvement, was really central because they also were introduced to the idea that there are hard and soft aspects of the built environment. And the study is very credible because it creates leverage for change and new partnerships. So I was 10 when I first read Marshall McLuhan's Gutenberg Galaxy. And living in a suburban village in southeast London, I was enthralled by his concept of the global village. And I dreamt, many nights I used to dream about being connected with other villages across the globe, wherever they were. And I used to collect posters of cities, even from when I was like 5, actually. Marshall McLuhan also predicted the internet, as you know, as an extension of consciousness. So when the global economic crash hit architecture and also the magazines were going bust, I set up my own online platform, Urbanista, to create a greater understanding of livable urbanism globally through examples and ideas. And I'm starting a network of progressive developers in London, including one company called Renewal, who are working next door to my secondary school, which is great. And there are these exceptions to the rule, and they need to be applauded, and we need to have better awareness of who they are, and explain why they're doing such, why are they going off the track from the usual fast track kind of juggernaut commercial vision. So quickly, I don't consider London to be visionary today because huge amounts of inward investment coming in, strong transport infrastructure, but it's not playing a creative role in realizing affordable housing for neighborhoods, and London and so many cities. So developers, as Indy Johar of 00 Architecture in London says, they should have a social license to operate. This would make them visionary, because then that means that they need to get local support before they can do anything, and that will level the playing field. And inequality in wealth and, let's say, access to housing and resources will be addressed. So cities must experience economic growth, right? but they need to build equitable opportunities and distributed systems appropriate to today, and more mechanisms like community land trusts. And so to develop briefs for urban design of a higher standard, we need to help educate politicians about what is needed, whether we're architect trained or not, with design training or not, because mostly they come from very different backgrounds, so they don't know. I have two exceptions in the UK. One is a South London MP, Minister of Parliament, and she's an urban planner. And then we have George Ferguson, who's a kind of hero, who's an architect and the former president of the Royal Institute of British Architects. And he is mayor of Bristol, and he's leading the European Green Capital 2015. That is going to be groundbreaking. That's as close to visionary plans as you can get in the UK, I think, rather than looking at London. So it's easier to be visionary today because the past is so good, full of good examples. But that doesn't actually mean that you replicate the past, but you need to draw on what worked before. Otherwise, cities forget their past. And planning that ignores memories and cultural value is of no use whatsoever. So unfinished work of the city, the evolution happens because of visionary citizens. And that's you, that's all of us. And a visionary citizen can identify the value of something precious, as well as the opportunities staring them in the face. So what role will you play in helping to write the city's next chapters? Thank you.